Can you hear me? I hope so. Sorry about the delay in getting the integrities up. They don't work really well from my house, and so I've been coming in to do them. So sorry that it's a day late and $1 short. So if you've been caught up in your current on your integrity assignments, Chapter 2 and 3 are operating under the same question that we're trying to answer. And the first part, Part A, we really went through the early exploration of Minnesota. So we talked in depth about the first French explorers to come through, Radisson, Grossier, Hennepin, and others who came, explored the area, and while they were here, they set up the fur trade. And so you see the fur trade becomes so important that it becomes the focus of wars between Native American groups, between European powers desperate to control the trade. And so we'll keep going with that when we get to the British control of this region. In Chapter 2, we also looked at how did this industry affect Native Americans, and we really looked at it in Chapter 1 too. We saw how it changed their traditional gender roles. We saw how it changed their occupational roles, whereas men used to maybe go out and hunt for food, and that was part of who they were, but now it became something where they did that to an extreme and depopulated whole regions of the sought-after animals like beaver and mink and deer and moose and others. So we see the fur trade and the European presence changing how Native Americans use the land and how they interact with each other. And so this part we're going to finish up Chapter 2 and get into Chapter 3, are really going to finish out that thought of the importance of the fur trade, and then finally how the Americans claimed this area as theirs. It wasn't divinely ordained or predestined that this was going to happen. It was something that happened through the politics of the time, and through negotiation, and through lies and economic rivalry, and those types of things we generally associate with politics today. So we're going to see how you ended up in the United States and not Canada, and then finally how the fur trade ends and why it ends, and its lasting effects on this state. So we're through about, I would say, half the question, and we've got about half to go. So now that the French and Indian War is over, the British have removed the French presence from North America. They've gotten them out of Canada. They've technically taken Louisiana and given it to Spain, but they'll eventually get it back, but that's a different story. There's no rival to the British now in North America. And so the British will just take over this trade and do exactly sort of what the French did and run it as what's good for business. So Arthur Dobbs is the governor of North Carolina, and he's convinced that the Hudson Bay Company, that's already been up there in northern Canada, has found the Northwest Passage, but they're hiding it from people. So there's a route to Asia, and the Northwest Passage has been found, but they're keeping it under wraps. So this is actually one of the very earliest conspiracy theories I've ever come across in all my history teaching. And if you've ever been in one of my classes, I dismiss most conspiracy theories as psychological nonsense, and it was reassuring to me to see one. Oh yeah, people have been doing this for hundreds and hundreds of years, and it's sort of part of the human condition. So he's going to send out a private expedition to find this government controlled Northwest Passage that's been kept under wraps, but they're not going to have enough money. Private expeditions are expensive. And so one of the people he'd put together, Jonathan Carver, was a map maker, and he'd wintered here at St. Anthony Falls in 1766. And remember what we talked about with Chapter 2. You explore, and you can maybe make money trading. But the other way to make money trading, exploring, is to write a book. And so that's what he does. He travels through the interior parts of North America, and it becomes a huge bestseller. And it's not very accurate. So some of it, the way the land is, some of the geography, but he claims to have found the starting point of 4 major rivers. So he sees Minnesota as this place where the Red River and the St. Louis River and the Mississippi and the Missouri all sort of start here in this magical land. He does write down talk of the Dakota about the Rocky Mountains. And so this is sort of the first mention to Europeans of the Rocky Mountains that no European has laid eyes on up to this point. So the British do some exploring, still remember searching for that easy way to Asia, but their real interest here is in making money and continuing this fur trade. So their fur traders still use French, and you see that in the different names that the jobs that they have. But they'll really they'll make a killing really off of the rendezvous system and setting up the trading posts, most notably at Grand Portage. If we had time on our trip to go there, man, that would be cool, but it's so out of the way, and it's so far north that we just can't work it into a schedule. But you have this little 9-mile connector between it and the Pigeon River, and from there you can canoe and portage a little bit more inside all the way to the Lake of the Woods, and then up into Manitoba, and get over near Winnipeg and get on the Red River. So it becomes a very important meeting place, and it becomes sort of an international economic hub, if you will. So the Northwest Company has a trading post there for 20-some years. Most of the time, the young guys coming, the greenhorns, that's a tough job. You got 2 90-pound packs, a 9-mile path, no carts, no wagons, no roads, literally back-breaking work. And then all the things you have to deal with in northern Minnesota. Mud, it's rocky ground, and mosquitoes that'll carry off newborns. So a tough job for a lot of these guys. Most of them don't stick in it. It's a summer job, if you will, and then they're out onto something else. The Northmen, the Winterers, they were guys that have been doing it. They're professionals. They're year after year, and they think they're better than the greenhorns, of course. So they don't share campgrounds. They eat separately, and much fewer the bourgeois, the director of the fur post. You see these French names, Mangur, bourgeois. You see the French impact on this trade. So what kind of goods are they trading? Kettles, rum, supplies. And by the time they get inland, they've jacked the price up at least 10 to 12 times what they cost in London. So if you get some rum and it's $1 in London, by the time you trade it to a Native American on the interior of the country, you're charging $12. So economically, this trade is exacting a pretty heavy toll in terms of resources like beaver, mink, moose, otter, in exchange for really, really overpriced goods. And you can see this in depth when it must be in the next slide, but with how much money the British made here. So each canoe, half-ton of goods. There, it goes to Montreal and London. Some of it goes to Russia and China. So this is an international trade. Minnesota today is sort of at the forefront of the American economy. We're one of the 5 fastest-growing economies in the country. We have 19 of the Fortune 500 companies. And so really international trade is, now knowing this part of American history, is something that we've always done, that we've always been good at, especially in comparison to other states around us. So the British are using this piece of land for maximum economic benefit. So Grand Portage, it really only operates at a tithe for 23 years, but the British continue to control this region even after the Treaty of Paris tells them not to. So if you want a little video there on Grand Portage, go to the Minnesota Video Vault and search Grand Portage. You'll see a video on life at Grand Portage come up. Well worth your time to watch. The Minnesota Video Vault is just cool videos. So, how much money did they actually make? And if you run the numbers, they're pretty staggering. So, from this book, The Fur Trade in Minnesota During the British by Wayne Stevens, he gives a lot of numbers, which is why I sort of use it in this lecture. 200,000 pounds sterling a year in value. So if you figure $1 million a year, and go to this website, it's called measuringworth.com. Maybe we'll go there together. Alright, let's try this. Here we go. Follow me. Oh, come on. We want a new window. Still hearing me? Can you hear me? I hope so. We don't want an update. And if we just put in 1796, put in $1 million, let's do 2010 just to make sure it works. And calculate. You can see that the British made a whole lot of money. Even just using consumer price index, you're looking at that $1 million that they made that year is worth $17 million in modern day money. But probably more realistic interpretations of what $1 million was worth back then are those bottom three numbers. If you use the nominal GDP, a relative share of GDP, what was $1 million in terms of its overall importance to the entire economy back then? The numbers are now going to start to run into the billions. So you can see you've got, let's see, count that up down there, $533 billion. So where's the truth in some of that? Well, it might be in the middle. Maybe it was $533 million, but this was highly sought after. This was a lot of money. That's why the British and the French fought for this. And that's one of the reasons that the British poured the resources into the French and Indian War that they did, was this idea of an economic prize to be got. So, if you want more information on any of this, there's the National Parks website on Grand Portage. There's the Minnesota History website. If you go to the Video Vault and you search for George Nelson, they have a video on George Nelson, who was a fur trader during the British time period. And then also you can get an excerpt of his writing in the optional book, The North Star State Reader. There's the Fur Trade Reminiscence by George Nelson, so you can get some depth on really what life was like individually for these guys. This was a tough and dangerous life, and you really see that captured, especially in his journal entry there. That's in the North Star State Reader. So chapter 3 in the book focuses now on the arrival of the Americans and the American claim to Minnesota, and really it's that last part of that question. So independence came from the British in 1783 at the Treaty of Paris. One of the reasons that the 13 colonies wanted to be independent was because the British didn't want to give them the land that they had acquired in the French and Indian War. So if you look over here on the map, right running almost from Pennsylvania all the way down into Georgia are the Appalachian Mountains. And the British in 1763 passed a proclamation which said there's to be no English settlement west of those mountains. We're going to let the Indians live there. That's going to be Indian land, and we're going to continue to do business with the Indians over there. Well, that sent a lot of colonists off because it felt like they had fought in that war too, and they had fought so that they could maybe get some of that land that the Indians and the French had. So, without going into the hundreds of hours of American history that this would leave us to, you have the War of Independence. The United States wins this improbable victory, and they go to Paris in 1783, and they get this treaty signed that really gives them quite a bit. They get to fish up in off Newfoundland, and they get this Northwest Territory all the way out to the Mississippi River. But the problem is they don't know where the Mississippi River starts. No European has really ever been there. And the map that they used while making this was drawn up by a guy who had never been here. And so you have this map that's incredibly unreliable, that was drawn up by a guy that had never been to Minnesota or been to this western boundary. And that's what they used to determine where British Canada would be and where the United States would be. So you can see on the map that basically that northern part of Minnesota would be encompassed. Sorry, my slides are out of order. So this is the actual map they used. So you can see that this is very much not a scale or reliable map for these negotiators, Ben Franklin and John Adams, to be using with the Treaty of Paris. So the northern boundary, it's somewhere up there. And how that gets settled in real life is a matter of politics in many ways. So if you're a British trader and you're working here in Minnesota, and this treaty comes down in 1783 that says basically this is now the United States territory, you need to give it back, if you will, or start working for the United States. None of them pay attention to this. The United States doesn't have any real authority out here. So David Thompson, working for the British Northwest Company, says, you know what, we got to find the headwaters of the Mississippi, and we got to really push the boundary lines southward. And so he's going to say that, oh yeah, I found it way, way down south, and therefore all of Minnesota belongs to the British. The King Hawkesbury Line, 1803, an agreement, is going to be maybe Turtle Lake, Brainerd area. You can see that on the map. By the time Thomas Jefferson gets elected, he wants the 49th parallel to be the boundary line between the U.S. and the British and Canada. So you can see how much further north the 49th parallel is there on the map. If you look under Manitoba, that's the 49th parallel. So we've got half of the state to two-thirds of the state of Minnesota in play here. And it's valuable land. We already talked about why each country would desperately want to keep this land. If we look at the equivalent of millions and millions of dollars worth of goods and products coming out of here. And so Jefferson will say the Treaty of Erie in 1713 states that that's the boundary between the British and the French, and so that's the line that we should accept. And so Jefferson kind of pulls a trick that a lot of students pull, and it's called a fake reference. So you have information, but you don't want to tell the teacher where you really got it from, like, on the computer somewhere or Wikipedia. So you make up a fake reference, like Smith 158 at the end, and call it that and hope you don't get caught. So Jefferson just did the same thing. And it was never in that treaty, but the British just accepted it. And they took it as, that's going to be our, it's in that treaty, then I guess we're going to have to accept that as the boundary. So you see the 49th come over to the water and into the Lake of the Woods, but what about the Rainy River? What about the Pigeon River? Because remember, the rivers are highways, and so the British accept that over to Lake of the Woods, but then neither side wants to give up access to these river highways, and so everything east of Lake of the Woods is still very much in play. So in 1805, when Jefferson has sent out Lewis and Clark to claim this Louisiana purchase, he also wants to make sure that the British know up in Canada that this is now our territory, that we have claimed this area. So he sends out Zebulon Pike, a young Army officer, whose goal is to reassert American claim to Minnesota. So you can see Jefferson working on the diplomatic front to claim Minnesota. He's also doing it on the ground. So Pike comes, he wants to choose army posts and especially try to broker a peace between the Ojibwe and the Dakota, because that's good for business. He'll meet at the mouth of the Minnesota River, and there he'll acquire land, and that land will become very important. So the 1805 purchase of the land that will eventually become Fort Snelling will be really a turning point in the United States gaining control of Minnesota, because when we get to the part with Fort Snelling, you'll see why it basically sits at the intersection of the two greatest highways and very close to the third rivers into the state. And if you can control them in that one spot, you could choke off all traffic in and out, and it becomes militarily impossible to claim Minnesota if you're not going to have Fort Snelling. And so I'm glad we get to go to Fort Snelling on the trip and get to see that, and hopefully it'll just be really evident when you're there. You'll see it, wow, this place really was a fortress for the time period. So Pike comes, doesn't really do anything else to speak of except shoot down a British flag, and returns back to St. Louis saying he had done his job. In reality, he didn't do a whole lot, but that piece of land that he acquired title to will be the most important thing that he did. And then eventually after that, he'll go out west and be famous for sighting Pike's Peak and getting caught by the Spanish. And so if you know anything else about Zebulon Pike from there, this video has a lot of information on him. It's kind of a funny video too, so you should check it out. But basically by the War of 1812, Minnesota is still very much no man's land, or more British than American. So it's still British traders working here. It's still British allies with the Native Americans. And the U.S. isn't really much of a factor here in Minnesota. But as settlement pushes west, as Indiana gets settled, as Ohio gets settled, as people begin to pour into Illinois, more and more American attention will be focused on securing this western land. So there you can see Pike's journey and back out. This was really important for the United States in claiming that new land picked up by the French, but also picked up from the French, but also in sort of keeping the British at bay in Canada. So now we get to a really, really funny part. And how do you divide all that water? And coming up with a treaty that can split the water access into these. So both sides want access to the rivers. We have the War of 1812 with the British that lasts until the end of 1814. But after that, relations they normalized and actually got friendly. So by 1819 and 1820, John Adams is the Secretary of State. He signed a peace treaty with the British, and he's agreed to a completely demilitarized Canadian-American, British-Canada American border. So no troops stationed on there. It is the longest, still in this world today, non-militarized border between any two countries. So the only military presence we have on the Canadian border is border agents, just like they do. And you think about this in terms of security for both countries. If we had to defend that thousands of miles long border, kind of like we have to do with the Mexican border, that would take a lot of resources. So security to the north has actually been a great benefit for the United States. So both sides are arguing. Finally, they agree that one side of the different rivers will be Canada, British Canada. The other side will be the United States. But as they're doing their maps and they're drawing the map out, they messed up the positioning of the Lake of the Woods. And so where that northwest angle you see there on the map was supposed to be under that sort of rigid line, but for some reason that line is up further. So that part of the area north of Lake of the Woods is part of the United States. It's just there's no land access to it, so you would have to leave, go into Manitoba, and drive over there if you wanted to go there by land. It's very sparsely settled. It's mainly a tourist fishing area and natural preserve area, so it's not, but it is the model for the state because it is the furthest area north in the continental United States. So there's no other place further north than that when it comes to the 48 states. Now Alaska will change that much later, but so if you wanted to go north in the United States, that's as far north as you could get. So there's your Star of the North, the state motto. And if you've ever been up there, you know it's even to this day, even with all our new security measures, it's still very informal in some places. The border isn't marked, or it's sparsely patrolled at best, and so the boundaries were just sort of there, and you could go back and forth at ease and at will between the two. I drove to Winnipeg in 1997. We had a basketball game to go to up there, and I was in a van with a basketball team full of guys, 15 of us, and we pulled up to the border, and they're like, "Where are you going?" "We're going to Winnipeg for basketball." I'm like, "All right, have fun." And then they let you go. No passports, no IDs, nothing. And it's probably much different today. I think to go to Canada, you need a passport. You can't go there without a passport now. And so it's become much more strict since 9/11, but for hundreds of years, there's a pretty informal relationship between the two. So we see after the War of 1812, the Americans creeping closer and closer to this area. Prairie du Chien becomes a major sort of military and diplomatic base for dealing with the Native Americans here, and the transfer of the fur industry to the American Fur Company after 1814. And then the Foreign Intercourse Act of 1816. So if you were British and you were living here in Minnesota as a trader, you would either naturalize, become an American citizen, or you would be forced to leave. And so most of these are British subjects who speak French, and that's their job. And so a lot of them actually end up becoming Americans. And there's some protectiveness about this area because there's still worries that perhaps, the British in Canada would want to come in and take this area. So one of the things that worries many Americans that leads to this Foreign Intercourse Act is Lord Selkirk, this British noble, wants to take poor people and relocate them to Manitoba. And Winnipeg is established as sort of this bright idea, and established this as sort of a British base for the area. So Assiniboia is a settlement that comes out of this, and because of that, the U.S. will be pretty insistent upon establishing the military bases, controlling the fur trade. In 1819, they'll start work on Fort Snelling, and so claiming this area of Minnesota for the United States permanently. And so the United States sends Colonel Henry Leavenworth here to start building the fort. His superiors didn't like the way he was doing it, so they replaced him with Josiah Snelling. Snelling actually changes some of the plans and wants to make it out of limestone. By building it out of limestone, you're basically making it immune to any attack that native populations could make against the United States. You would need literally a cannon to get through those walls. So Fort Snelling becomes sort of an unquestioned holdout of American power in Dakota land, right there at the confluence of the Minnesota and the Mississippi River. So renamed in 1825 after him, it's sort of the first of everything from Minnesota. So hospital, school, library. It's where the St. Peter Agency makes payments to the Dakota. It's where the fur traders all sort of gather around. You have a large group of losers and fugitives and slackers that hang around on the outside of the fort. And also the Dred Scott case has its origins here at Fort Snelling. A lot of people don't know that. Dred Scott will be a major court case in 1857 that will divide the country and really send it towards a civil war. Well, Dred Scott was a slave, and his owner was an army captain. That army captain was stationed at Fort Snelling and then on into Wisconsin. And then eventually Dred Scott will say, since I was in free territory, Minnesota and Wisconsin, I'm a free person. And that's what that court case will be about. And the Supreme Court will say, no, you're not a citizen, and you don't have any rights. And so because of that 1857 court case, you have one of the major conditions that leads us to the Civil War.